Thanks, guys. Appreciate you, man. Well, it's time to wrap it up, right? I mean, we could put it off, but going down the hill is inevitable. And just what Frank just said, it'd be great if we could hold on to some of the stuff that we got up here this weekend. Amen? Amen. And not lose it. And that's really the deal. I've had guys tell me before, he says, I don't go to retreats anymore because I just go get fired up and then come home, and just as soon as I walk through the door at home, it's pretty much out the window. Which is why we meet every week in our men's group, is because I can meet with our guys, and we have a Tuesday morning prayer time. And just about all the guys that come to the prayer time come to Friday mornings. And so I'll say to the guys, I'll go on Tuesday morning, and I'll say, okay, what did I teach on Friday? 24 guys. They're all sitting there just like you. They don't know what I taught on Friday, but they know it was red hot. It was good. It was good. I mean, just ask a guy next time he hears a sermon, just go, well, and they'll come out and they'll go, man, it was really good. And go, what did he preach on? I don't remember, but it was really good. So, hearing it over and over again, Jesus said, verily, 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 I say unto you, often, often, oftentimes, again and again. Because he knows that hearing is the worst way. I appreciate the note-taking that I'm seeing in here, because hearing is about the worst way you can do. It's why Kevin's ministry is so important, because you can go, online now, and you can go back and see all these guys. You can go last year, the year before, and see all these guys that spoke before. And we have the technology to be able to do that. Someday we may stand before God, and God, the question again is, does God want you to be a man of God? Yeah. Has He withheld anything you need to be a man of God? No, not really. Oh, well, I could have used a few more translations of the Bible. I could have used the Bible that I could have gotten on my telephone, so I wouldn't be anywhere without it. Well, He gave you that in many different translations. And we're going to have a hard time standing before God one day and just say, you know what, I didn't have enough opportunities. I didn't have enough resources. Didn't have enough money. And what you really didn't have enough was prayer and commitment. I mean, that's what we need. And so I want to send you home, and you're not going home, you're being sent home. Okay? Yeah, and then when the teacher or the principal said that was not good. But when God says that, He doesn't just release you, He sends you out. And every Friday morning, that's what I tell the guys. The last thing I tell them after I've closed the final prayer, Frank, what do I tell them?
Give them heaven.
Give them heaven out there, guys. They're getting enough hell out there. We need some guys out there that are dispensing heaven to guys, showing them what it's like, giving them a taste. And that's why we come together. We come together just to be reminded we're the salt of the earth. We're the light of the world. But have you noticed that any time that you set your mind to doing something that's worthwhile, something that's going to enhance your spiritual progress, something that's going to help other people, you always run into resistance. You always have things that want to block the way. You got the world, you got the flesh, you got the devil. And between the world and flesh and the devil, they're always trying to block anything good. That's their job. That's their nature. That's what they do. We shouldn't be surprised about it. And God's been giving us everything we need to defeat and overcome it, to endure it, to be more than conquerors in His name. And but we should just understand, again, life is hard, and you're going to have resistance in your life. I looked up that word. It means opposition. An opposing or retarding force, an act of setting opposite, over, and against. A hostile or contrary action against you. When you go to the gym, you go, not me, but when you go to the gym and you lift weights, what is that? That's a hostile force attacking your muscles. But what happens to your muscles? See, what God does is He uses everything the devil throws at us. And if we'll trust in Him, God will use it against the devil. And He'll use it to bless you. if you're looking to be blessed, and if you're living in what one guy calls the second half of life, as opposed to the immature growing up first half of life, where it's all about you, where the second half, it's all about Christ and others. Where you start maturing, and the things in the Sermon on the Mount and the maturity it takes, the courage it takes to live out the Christian life with fear and trembling, as Paul said in Philippians, then you're beginning to arrive at that place. There are some men, and we call them thumb suckers, they pull on their ear and suck their thumb their whole Christian life. It's hard to get them out of diapers. Paul addressed those people. He says, you guys ought to be teachers, but you're still needing to be taught the basic elementary principles of the Word. But you ought to be out there teaching. You've been around. You've been sitting in that seat, listening to good teaching. You've been getting good messages. You know what the truth is. And I'm going, you want to be God's man? Yeah, kind of. But I'm not sure what that guy, and the guy that we were in our journey groups, our small groups, we're going on this journey to intimacy with Christ. And so we were starting a new journey group a few years ago, and this guy was going to be in the journey group, and I didn't know him real well. And I said, let's go to breakfast. And he said, okay, let's do. We went to Mimi's, and before our rear ends hit the seat, he said, look, I want to tell you something. He says, I'm going on this journey, but I ain't going in that inner chamber. I think I told you guys this. And I said, why is that? And I laughed the first thing I did because of his honesty. It was just refreshing. And he says, I don't want to lose control of my life. I said, what gives you the idea you got control of your life? I mean, who told you that lie? He knew that this God in the inner chamber was going to mess with him. He knew the God in the inner chamber was going to call him to do things. It gifted him to do things that were higher, to do things that were above his normal human nature, to do things that were supernatural, to do things that he could not do on his own, to go places that he didn't want to go. Jesus looked at Peter and said, Peter, when you were a young man, you kind of did what you wanted to do and go and what you wanted to go. But when you're old, they're going to tie you up and they're going to make you go where you don't want to go. There's a sense of that when you give your heart and your life to Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ becomes Lord of your life, you're not in charge anymore. And that keeps a lot of men from getting into heaven, to be honest with you. They say, look, I really want to go to heaven, and I want to miss hell, but I don't want to do it if I have to change. If I have to be transformed, if I have to be different, if I have to do what he does or do it the way they do it over there, no, I'm not in. I want to keep control. I want to be the guy calling the shots. Jesus to me can be an add-on. I'll take his advice, but I'm going to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it, and if I want to do it. There's so many guys out there that are living in that posture spiritually that they never see anything happen, and they're barnacle on the boat of Christ. And they're not helping. And so I know that's not what you want to be. But we got some in here. We got some in every group. In every group there's some in there. Now, the point is, you may have made some commitments. You may have heard something this weekend from me or one of the guys that was sharing a testimony, or from some of the clergy that's been here, some of the conversation around the tables. You may have heard something and you go, boy, you know what? I need to get it out of low gear. I need to find that gear stick. I need to turn over a new leaf. I need to start this and I need to stop doing that. And that's what these things are all about. But be aware and be forewarned that you're going to run into resistance. You always will. When we were going through that 21 days, Rhonda Huey, who wrote the book Desperate for His Presence, and who basically coached us through doing this thing, she said, here's the deal. We're going to limit ourselves. We're going to fast. Some of you are going to fast from food. Some of you are going to fast and limit yourself in certain diets. You may do a Daniel diet where you're not eating anything but fruit and vegetables. Some of you guys will do a water diet for a few days. But whatever fast that you do, your body is going to say no. Your flesh is going to come against it. Your flesh is going to go, I don't want to do that. And once you start doing that, your flesh is saying, okay, that's enough. I know you were going to do it for 2 days, but now, 1 day is enough. The devil's always going to come along. And he's going to encourage you to quit. He's going to encourage you to compromise. He's going to encourage you to come down lower. He'll always come at your lower nature. The nature that wants pleasure, the nature that wants to do it. If we get a choice between the hard way and the easy way, guess which way we choose? But Jesus chose the hard way. And he taught Paul to go the hard way. Paul says, I've been beaten 5 times with rods. I've been stoned and left under a pile of rocks. He just went through all kinds of crud. But you know what he said? This present suffering is nothing compared to the glory and the reward to come. See, if you're not rooted in your salvation, if you're not rooted in the fact that you're forgiven and there's a glory to come, if you're not rooted in the fact that there are rewards for those who seek Him, and for those who follow Him, and for those who obey Him, you're never going to do it. You're going to be a Christian in spots. You're going to be a Christian when it's easy. You're going to be a Christian when it's convenient. You're going to be that casual guy that becomes a casualty and that we spend so much of our time trying to pick up and lift up and get him out of his depression, get him out of his doldrums, get him out of his anger, get him out of his frustration and his bitterness. We got a lot of really mournful deaths going on out there. See, the last thing that you make peace reality about is you're going to die. I mean, mortality rate last time I checked was 100%. So we don't only want to teach guys how to live, we want to teach them how to die. Now, some of them we don't get a chance. We've had them drop dead on golf courses, drop dead in their garages from heart issues, and I've sung many guys into heaven, where me and my worship buddy would just go and we were singing hymns and singing praise songs and kind of celebrating their going home as they took their last breath. I sat at the bedside of one of the men's wives, and we've had several of our men, like we have one this weekend, that lost their wives. And I can't imagine that. And Susan and I are both hoping we go first. And I'm saying, I better go first. I mean, for all the reasons. I went from mother's table to the training table, to the Susan's table. And some guys had the advantage of being bachelors and they know how to cook. I'm that Carl's commercial standing there looking at the meat. And they say some guys would starve to death without us. Well, that's me. They made that commercial for me. Standing there. But the nature of the world we live in is to experience resistance to any effort to make progress. But if you'll resist it, because what Jesus say, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. If you'll resist the devil when he comes, if you'll resist those negative comments, those comments that appeal to your flesh, that appeal to the easy way, then he says that I'll be there with you and you can overcome it and my grace is sufficient. Paul says, I got this thorn in the flesh. And I asked the Lord 3 times. Remember that? Lord, take it away. No. Lord, take it away. I don't think so. Lord, take it away. And he went, I'm not taking it away. And I don't want you to ask me anymore because my grace is sufficient for you. And Paul says, I'm going to glory in my weakness. Now, Paul is an overcomer. Paul decided instead of griping about my weakness and that thorn in the flesh, whatever it was, and we all have them, and God uses them if we'll let Him to strengthen us. The nature of the falling world understands that there's a destructive force inside of the heart of man that rises whenever we consider a tough or a long-term course of action that might do for us and others something that's actually good. I underlined in that quote, tough long-term course of action. We say, guys, we're going on a journey to intimacy with Christ. Love you to come along. Well, what's that about? Well, it's 6 to 9 months. If you meet every other week, it's 9 months. If you meet every week, which we're going to do, it's about a 6-month thing. I don't think I could commit to 6 months. Why's that? Well, I'm busy. I got things to do. I got garbage to take out, watches to wind. And there's always something going on. I'm a busy man. I mean, think about it. How many times have you used the I'm busy, I got things going on? How many times have you used that? How many times have you said, I just don't think I can fit it into my calendar? Now, whatever this is, and there are things that can't fit into your calendar. You have to prioritize, right? But again, the danger in your life is not that you're going to fail at something that's really important to you. It's that you're going to succeed at things that don't matter. You got to prioritize your life, and you got to say, what really matters? That's why we find our identity in Christ. That's why we love Jesus, and that's why we want to spend the rest of our life learning to be like Him. Well, then those things become priorities in our life. If you want to have a great marriage, you're going to have to make your wife and your marriage a priority. And you got to understand there's nothing wrong in her that God can't fix in you. Should I say that again? There's nothing wrong in your wife that God can't fix in you. That means that you need to take responsibility for your marriage. And you need to quit saying to God, it's this woman you gave me. I'd be a good guy if it wasn't for her. You understand what this woman has done. You understand how she has not respected me. You understand how, you said be submissive. You ought to take that up with her sometime. She ain't being submissive. I've had guys literally tell me that. I said, boy, what a loser you are. I literally have to tell guys that sometimes. Satan called a worldwide convention of demons in his opening address. We're talking about being busy. He said we can't keep Christians from going to church. We can't keep them from reading their Bibles and knowing the truth. We can't even keep them from forming an intimate relationship with their Savior. Once they gain that connection with Jesus, our power over them is broken. So let's let them go to church. Let them have their potlucks. But here's the deal, steal their time so that they won't have time to develop a relationship with Jesus Christ. And this is what I want you to do, said the devil. Distract them from gaining a hold of their Savior and maintaining that vital connection throughout the day. Well, how are we going to do that, the demon shouted. It's going to be easy, the devil said. Keep them busy with the non-essentials of life. Invent innumerable schemes to occupy their minds. Tempt them to spend, and borrow. Persuade their wives to go to work for long hours and their husbands to work 6 to 7 days a week. 10 to 12 hours a day so they can afford their empty lifestyles. Keep them from spending time with their children. As their families fragment soon, their homes will often offer no escape from the pressures of work. Overstimulate their minds so that they cannot hear that still small voice. Entice them to play the radio or CD player whenever they drive. And tempt them to get DVD players for their kids, even in the cars and vans. Have them keep the TV, the VCR, CDs, and PCs going constantly in their homes, and see to it that every store and restaurant in the world plays fast-paced music constantly. Now this will jam their minds and break their union with Christ. Fill the coffee tables with magazines and newspapers. Pound their minds with news 24 hours a day. Invade their driving moments with billboards. Flood their mailboxes with junk mail, mail order catalogs, sweepstakes, every kind of newsletter and promotional offering, free products, services, and false hopes. Keep skinny, beautiful models on the magazines and TV so their husbands will believe that outward beauty is what's important, and they'll become dissatisfied with their wives. Keep the wives too tired to love their husbands at night. Give them headaches too. If they don't give their husbands the love they need, they'll start looking elsewhere. Have the husbands neglect their wives and children and convince them that their busyness and daily sacrifice of working so hard to give their family a better lifestyle is worth it. That will keep the husbands in trouble with their wives, and they'll feel unappreciated and they'll give up. Hey, it gets easier. Even in their recreation, let them be excessive. Have them return from their vacations exhausted. Keep them busy to go in nature and reflect on, so they won't go in nature and reflect on God's creation. Send them to amusement parks, sporting events, plays, concerts, and movies instead. Keep them busy, busy, busy. And when they meet for spiritual fellowship in their small groups, involve them in gossip and small talk so that they leave with troubled consciences. Let them talk, talk, talk. But whatever you do, don't let them pray. A prayer at the beginning and the end, that's a Christian thing. Let them do that. That's okay. That's no threat. But keep them from talking about the Bible or anything else to fill their time. But don't let them have time for prayer. Crowd their lives with church involvement in so many good causes that they have no time to seek the power from Jesus. Soon they will be working in their own strength, sacrificing their health and family for the good of the cause. It'll work. I know it'll work. And it was quite a plan. The demons went eagerly to their assignments, causing Christians everywhere to get busier and more rushed, going here and there, having little time for their God or their families, having no time, energy, or credibility to tell others about the power of Jesus to change their lives. So I guess the question is, has the devil been successful in his schemes? You be the judge. You're going to have resistance, guys. You know the truth. You know you ought to spend time with God. You ought to make Him a priority, but you're not going to. You're going to say, well, I know I need to. Am I going to do it? Is it right? Yeah. Should I do it? Yeah. Am I going to do it? Really, probably not. I'll probably go back to my house and I'll be the same guy I was when I came up. I heard some good things and I appreciated the things that were said and the worship that we had and the small group talks, but going home and really doing anything that's going to be transformative in my life, that's going to change anything, that's going to get me closer to Christ, keep me closer to Christ, take it a day at a time, guys, because when you look at the long haul and you say, I got to do this for the rest of my life, you're going to quit. You're not even going to start out. Save yourself the time and the frustration. If your attitude is, well, I'll just start it and quit it like I always do, and that'll give me more reason for guilt and shame, the devil comes along and he fans that flame. So you got to decide. I can't decide for you. Guy next to you can't decide for you. Your wife is pushing you, but she can't decide for you. You got to decide for you. Whether it's a diet, whether it's fasting, whether it's being in Bible study, whether it's getting up early and going to this or that, the other that might really enhance your spiritual walk and encourage you in that direction. There's a black dog and a white dog, and they're always fighting it out in your spirit. And both of them are ruthless. And you know the analogy, the one that wins is the one you feed the most. You feed that human nature, you feed that lower nature, you feed that business nature, you feed that busyness nature. And that's a nature that's going to dominate your life. That's a nature that's going to cause the decisions that you make. That's a nature that will become the priorities for you. You got to decide that you're going to feed that white dog, that higher nature in you, that true self that God created you to be. My prayer when I came to Christ, I'll remind you again, Lord, I'm a total failure being a Christian. I can't do this. I can't keep the rules. I have no power. Start things I can't finish. And I quit on things, and I don't understand things, and I'm frustrated. I know I'm not the man you created me to be, but I want to be. I never thought about that until just a few years ago. Why did I want to be? I had friends that didn't want to be God's man. But I did. It's something about God's choosing, God's calling, God's selection, God's election of a man. You need to know whether God's put His hand on your life or not. You need to know if God's called you or He hasn't called you. Now, you know, when it comes to the call of God, is it irresistible or is it not? I think with Paul, it must have been irresistible. I mean, he's flat on his face and went blind, so I guess that was fairly irresistible. But the call of our lives is not always that dramatic, not always that clear. We hear these voices, but there's a lot of voices out there. And the voices that are the loudest are the voices you're going to listen to and the voices you're going to make decisions based on. And if you're feeding that black dog, they're not going to be voices that are going to tell you to sacrifice or give up or surrender. They're never going to be those voices that will dominate your life or that you'll hear, or turn the other cheek or go the second mile or give to that needy cause. Some of you are still sitting on your money waiting for that rainy day, making sure you're secure when there are people around you that are homeless and can't afford to go to the retreat and can't afford to put gas in their car to get home from the meeting. And we're not even giving that a thought. Pulling some money out of your pocket, giving it to some guys that are hurting. I don't just mean the homeless guys on the street. I mean the guys coming to the men's group, men coming to church, men losing their homes. We're living in days when the body of Christ is going to have to take care of itself and take care of each other. We're living in days where people are going to lose their fortunes. We're living in days where people are the hardships on its way. All these analysts that are talking about the financial collapse and the dollar losing its value and hyperinflation, and maybe we ought to be paying attention to that. Maybe we ought to give it away before the government takes it away. Maybe we ought to invest it in the kingdom. Not just it, but our lives, our time, our efforts. Maybe we ought to be about doing God's business and doing it with more a sense of urgency, with more of a sense of priority, or more a sense of passion. Maybe you ought to just go away and sit and think about that for a little while. Maybe you ought to pull out your journal and journal about that just a little while. Maybe you need to be honest with God and bring it out into the light and say, God, I have no passion. I had a friend, and he didn't have a passion. He didn't have a calling, and he knew, he had heard people talking about, I got a passion for this, and I got a passion for that, and he said, God, I don't have a passion. What should my passion be? Next thing he knew, he had this unbelievable passion for the Jewish people. And so he went over to Israel, and he just volunteered at a military base and said, look, I just want to come and serve. That's all I want to do. I'll clean up, I'll clean toilets, I'll clean latrines. I'll do whatever you want me to do. And they gave him a job, and all summer long, that's what he did. Next year, he went back and did the same thing. Next year, he ran into a group called the Society for the Preservation for Nature in Israel, or something like that. And so he went to those guys and he says, what do you do? And he said, well, we got camps all over Israel, and we take kids and they go to nature camps, and we kind of teach them all about nature in Israel. He goes, what if I brought some people over here? Do your camps need to be cleaned up or things done at the camp and all that kind of stuff? And he goes, yeah. So in 1995, my 15-year-old son and I were on a mission trip with him, going to Israel, not on a tour, but going to these camps and just doing grunt work, picking up trash, digging holes, stacking rocks. We'd work all morning long, have lunch, and then they'd show us around the area. We went down to the Negev, down there on the edge of the biggest natural crater in the world. And then we went all the way up to Mount Hermon and right near Lebanon and saw all that stuff. And we went to the Galilee. We picked up trash along the Jordan River. It was an amazing 2 weeks. All because this guy asked God for a passion. And God gave him one. You know, when God gives you a passion, and we men are afraid to go in the inner chamber because he's going to want me to go to Africa. And he's going to want me to go start working with the homeless, or going in and giving baths to the AIDS patients, or whatever he may call you to do. You know, wash the car of some Republican. And you know what? That sounds like him to me. Something he might want me to do. Wash the feet of that man that just fired and betrayed me and lied about me. That sounds like what he might ask me to do too. Jesus didn't skip Judas when he was going down the line of washing feet. Here's the thing that we don't understand about God, and the reason that we fear him in these kind of situations is God gives you not only a passion, but he gives you a want to. Those guys that are over in Africa, those guys that are over in Papua New Guinea, those guys that are down in Mexico, those guys that are wherever they are serving Christ, there's nowhere they'd rather be. We were going in and out of Eastern Europe for 3 years, actually 6 years. Living over there for 3 years, traveling in and out behind the Iron Curtain. Guys are going, I don't know if I could do what you do. I said, if God called you, you could. God gives you the grace to do what he's called you to do. He gives you the want to, the joy. There's nothing you'd rather do. You don't want to be somewhere else. You want to be right in the center of God's will. That's the safest place on earth, wherever that is. And I've had parents wringing their hands because their kids want to go to dangerous countries and be missionaries. We've got some friends whose son's in Jordan right now. And man, it's hot over there right now. They've had a couple killed. They've had people thrown in jail. We don't have the protection as Americans around the world we used to have. They're not afraid of America anymore. They're not afraid of persecuting Americans. We have some covering, but it's not like it used to be. And I just tell the parents, I said, if God's calling your son to go to some country that's going to be a threat, some country where there's danger, he's going to be safer there than here if that's where he wants him. That's the way it works. That's the way God works. God's called you and me to be otherworldly. He's called us to live not for this world, but for that world. That's a really hard one for us. Especially us Americans, us people who live in Newport Beach and Orange County and America in general. Man, we've got heaven right here. What do I need Hawaii for? I got Pelican Hill. I got all these golf courses, which is what I realized when I went over to Hawaii, and I said, man, I can't wait to get on their golf courses. And I played their golf courses, and I'm sure there's some I could play to impress me more, but I'm going, they got nothing on the golf courses I get to play in Southern California. What do I need heaven? I got Corona Del Mar. I got the beach here. And so we build heaven right here on earth, and then we start investing in that. We start putting our dreams and our security in that. And you know what insecurity is? Insecurity is putting your hopes and dreams in something that can be taken away from you. Which means that security is putting your hopes and dreams in something that can never be taken away from you. During that depression, when everybody lost, back in the 20s, when they lost all their money and their stock and they were broke all of a sudden and they had been wealthy, guys were jumping out of buildings because they put their security in something that could be taken away. No man is a fool, Jim Elliot said, who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. It's about time for American Christian men who are serious about their faith in Christ and following Him, who are serious about helping as many people get to heaven as they can, to start putting stuff on the altar. You got an Isaac in your life? You got an Isaac that you need God saying, you need to put that on the altar? You need to give that to me. I remember we were praying one time as an elder board in our church, and we were praying about this kind of stuff. And this one elder had two beautiful little girls. One was about 4 and the other one was about 6. Little blondes. And then we were praying about putting those things precious to us on the altar, and he had his face in his hands weeping, saying he's asking too much. He's asking too much. The safest place his daughters could be was on that altar, giving them to the Lord. But we hold on to those kind of things as if we can control what happens to them. You have no control over what's going to happen with your kids, with you, with your wife, with the government, with the economy. You're not in control. The only thing you can control is whether you're going to be a man that's driven by faith or a man that's driven by fear. You're going to be a fear-based guy, you're going to be a faith-based guy. You're going to let it go and let God have it, or you're going to try to hold on to it and lose it for sure. You're going to hold it and let it go and God takes you and gives you something better, or you're going to hold on to it and let it rot. Because those are the choices that we make. And we become so fearful that we get frozen in place. We can't move, we can't function. We panic. You lay awake at night. You can't sleep. But those things that you give to the Lord, those things that you turn over to Him, those things that you put in His care, God says, okay, good, now I'll take care of it. You're up against something that's really difficult. You're up against something that you can't solve. It's a mystery, it's a parable, it's a frustration. There was this logger, and he lived out in the woods, and he lived in a cabin out there, and one night in the middle of the night, this bright light shone in his room and woke him up, and he said, "Who's that?" He goes, "It's God." "Oh, what do you want?" He goes, "Well, I got a mission for you. Got an assignment." He says, "Okay. When you wake up in the morning, there's going to be this big boulder out in front of your cabin. I mean, it's going to be bigger than you are, and it's going to be big, and it's going to be heavy. But I want you to push that boulder." And then God left. And the guy went, "Crud, I guess I better do that." He looked out the door the next morning, sure enough, this big old boulder's out in front of his cabin. So he started pushing the boulder. He went out and he pushed and he pushed and he pushed and he pushed all day. He pushed all afternoon, fell into bed exhausted that night. Next day he got up and did the same thing. Push, push, push. Strive, strive, strive. Push that boulder. Fell into bed just exhausted and worn out. That went on for days and it went on for weeks, a couple of months. Then finally the guy's thinking, how stupid is this? And the devil came along and said, yeah, I agree. It's really stupid. Look at you. What good are you doing here? You ain't moved that boulder. You're not making any progress. If I was you, I'd quit. He says, yeah, I've been thinking about that. I think I should. But I better go check with God. So he went and told God. He said, God, look, this is not making any sense at all. I'm getting tired. I'm getting exhausted. Nothing's happening. The boulder ain't moving. I kind of feel foolish pushing this thing every day. He said, well, so you think things aren't happening? He says, when you started pushing that boulder, you were kind of a skinny little wimp. He said, but look at your legs now. Look how strong they are. Look at your back, the bulging muscles in your shoulders and your arms. Look how much stronger you are now that you've been pushing that boulder. So I'm thinking something has been happening while you've been pushing that boulder, just not what you thought was going to happen. And by the way, when I told you to push the boulder, did I tell you to move it? Well, no, I guess you didn't. He said, okay, I didn't. So why don't you get out of the way and I'll move the boulder. You got a boulder in your life you've been pushing against? You got some resistance in your life that the Lord says, I'm going to make you stronger because of this resistance. And you are going to have to stand up against it, and you are going to have to push it, and you are going to get frustrated because it's not moving. But there comes a point in time where you have to get out of the way and let God move it. There comes a point in time where you just have to say, okay, God, I understand you making me stronger because of this resistance, because of this big old boulder that I'm pushing. But if you want to move this thing, you're going to have to move it because I've proven I can't move this thing. But I've become stronger trying. And that's the nature of the life that we live. Everybody knows about endurance. Everybody knows about character. Everybody knows about integrity, but not everybody has it. It's a very rare commodity today to even value character and integrity in a man of his word, being a man of God. When you picture a man of God, I think that's what we picture. We think of man. When you say, that's a man of God over there. Well, that means there's a man of prayer. There's a man who keeps his word. There's a man who follows through. There's a man you can trust. There's a man who's safe. There's a man who's dependable. There's a man who's Christ-centered. And if there's anything this culture needs, it needs men who are Christ-centered. It needs men who aren't confused about who they are. And their life reflects it. There are men that have surrendered, they've given up, they've become like a little child. It's against our man code. Jesus in one chapter said, let those little children come to me. For unless you become like a little child, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. And we're going, I got to become a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. I'm a man, I'm macho. And Jesus says, well, you may be macho. You may be, the manly man that you think you are and the culture thinks you are. That may be your outward persona, but unless you become like a little child, dependent upon me, realizing you can't do nothing apart from me, then you're never going to get into the kingdom of heaven. And then later on, he sees these guys arguing about the important things like who's the greatest among them. Men are competitive, have you noticed that? And so they're arguing, and Jesus sees a teaching moment. And so Jesus says, time out. You guys know how the Gentiles lorded over those under them and exercise authority? Yeah. Well, it's not so among you. That's not how we act. That's in this new man code. It's not about exercising authority. It's not about how much power you have over other people. It's not about how many people work for you. It's about washing feet and serving them. And if you want to be first, you're going to have to become a servant. And if you want to be great, you're going to have to become a slave of all. When I was with the Navigators, we used to have leadership conferences. We'd have a one-day conference, pull in a big speaker. He'd speak in the morning. He'd speak after lunch. We'd have workshops, in the morning. We'd have workshops in the afternoon. We always had leadership workshops. And they were always packed out. And I often wondered, I said, what if we had a slave of all workshop? Come and learn how to be a slave of all. I'm not sure it would be full. I'm not so sure it'd be packed out. We all want to be leaders, but who wants to be a slave? Who wants to wash feet? Who wants to become a little child? Who wants to be a servant of all? If you spend time in Jesus Christ present, that's what you're going to get. You spend time with Him, and you're going to find out what it means to be a little child, be dependent. You're going to find out how to do that, just the way that He did that. Is everything in you going to resist it? Absolutely. But as you follow Him and as you develop an intimate relationship with Him in His Word and prayer and fellowship with men like you surrounded with today, God will give you an understanding and a want to. He'll give you an understanding. And the way it works is this. If you spend time in His presence, it's not like He says, okay, we're going to become a child 101. Although He has that class for you, when you spend time in God's presence, His character, His nature, His image is just starting to be formed in you, and you don't even know it until later. You don't know it until things have changed. When I became a Christian, you know what God did? God took profanity. I'd struggle with profanity. I tried to quit cursing. I'd put rules on poker games. Say, okay, anybody cusses, they have to throw a chip in the pot. I'd be out after 2 hands. I couldn't control anything. I make the rule and couldn't keep them. And one of the things God did is He just took profanity right out of my vocabulary. I thought it was just one of His marks of His ownership on me and a gift He gave me. And I didn't even know it until I struck out with guys in scoring position in late innings, and what I usually throw something or throw my helmet or say a bunch of cuss words, and they weren't there. They didn't come out anymore. And I went, wow, buds. Buds are on my branches. And then I just stay by the water, and you just kind of don't pay much attention. You're just spending time by the stream, and you go, oh, leaves. Leaves are there. And God just begins to form His image in you because you're just spending time with Him. That's the way it goes. We rub off. Iron sharpens iron. One man sharpens another. And you spend time in Jesus' presence, and He just sharpens you. He just gives you His image. He starts filling you the fruit of His Spirit. All of a sudden, this love that you're going, how could I love that person? You start loving them, and you go, how do I do that? Why do I have this changed heart toward them now? Why do you want to just pinch their neck off and spit down it? And now I just want to go serve them. Now I just want to go try to be a blessing. God's relieved me of all that getting even. He's relieved me of all that unforgiving heart, those negative, toxic emotions that I had. And all of a sudden they start going away. Not because you went to class, not because you studied on them, because you've been spending time in Jesus' presence, and His image and fruit of His Spirit starts welling up in you. That's the way it works. You can go to all the anger management classes you want to, but you just spend some time in Jesus' presence, and He'll start taking the anger fight out of you. And He'll start giving you His Spirit. If you abide in me and my word abides in you. If you abide in me. If you abide in me and my word abides in you, you're going to bear much fruit, my fruit, the fruit of the Spirit. You're going to be gentle and patient. You're going to be good and kind. You're going to have the joy of the Lord. You're going to have the peace that surpasses all comprehension, and you're going to have a love that's agape love, that loves because it's the essence of itself, not because they deserve it, but because that's who you are. Jesus Christ died while we were still sinners. You're going to have grace to give. You're going to be gentle with people. You're going to be more sensitive to who they are and what's going on in their life. You're going to be compassionate, and you're going to be able to feel for them. That's what Jesus did. He looked at the people and He felt for them and He wept over them. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I would have gathered you under my wings like a mother hen does her chicks. But you wouldn't let me. Will you let Him? Will you let Jesus Christ gather you under His wings? Will you get yourself under the covering of Christ? Will you become like a little child so that He can really use you? Would you become nothing so He could become everything? I mean, that's the whole Christian life. Paul says, look, I've given up everything for Him. If I had reputation. I was a legend. I was a Pharisee. As for zeal, man, I was a Pharisee. I was a Jew of Jews. And you know what? I count all that stuff rubbish. Garbage. Feces. Compared to knowing Jesus Christ. Guys, until we get there, we're not going to impact the culture. We're not going to make a difference. And we'll never be the men that God called us to be. Now, you're a man of God. You're not confused about who you are. You're a man that God's saying, okay, guys, this is a locker room. And there's an enemy out there. There'll always be opposition. There's always resistance. And we're going out there and we're going to beat that guy. You know how we're going to beat him? We're going to wash his car. You know how we're going to beat him? We're going to turn the other cheek. You got courage to do that, guys? Because if you don't, just keep your seat and don't go out there and do us some damage and be cutting Malchus' ear off with your sword. Don't be going out there and just standing up and being the macho man that defends yourself and has to take care of yourself. Because see, I'm going to send you out like sheep among wolves. I'm going to send you out there to be just doormats for these guys. You got the courage to do that? Are you man enough? Have you shaken off that old man coat enough to where you can live in the Spirit of Christ? And so you don't have enemies out there anymore. You don't have to. And all those things that you think are your enemies, those health issues that you have, they're not enemies, they're friends. I send them to keep you humble. I send them to keep you focused on me. I send them to strengthen you in the inner man. Not to tear you down, not to destroy you, but to build you up. Are you going to cooperate with me or not? Are you going to be my man or not? Are you in or are you out? And in ancient days, there was a big king and he had a big army. And he was taking, in the days when kings go to war, he would expand his territory and he would gather his big giant army of hundreds, if not thousands. And they would just start heading in one direction, taking every village, conquering territories, expanding his kingdom. But he came up against the border of a young chieftain named Abu Tabor. And he heard of this young king, and he only had a couple of hundred men in his army. And he knew he could go in and wipe him out. But instead, he had heard this is a valiant kid. He is a king, and his army was ruthless and skilled. And he thought, boy, you know, I could use these guys in my army. I think instead of just going in and wiping them out and raping and pillaging, I'll send an emissary in there and I'll tell him that he could just surrender and give up and join me instead of me killing him and all his people. So we sent the emissary in. He was looking for, where's Abu Tabor? And he's under the white flag and everything. And they said, well, he's right over there. Because you couldn't recognize him among all the guys. If you stumbled on David's campfire, you wouldn't know which one was king. If you stumbled on Jesus' campfire, you wouldn't know which one was the Son of Man and the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Abu Tabor was that kind of leader. So we went over to Abu Tabor and he said, my king's on the border of your country and he's about to come in and kill all you guys, but he was thinking it'd be great to have you just join him. And you could just surrender before he comes in and kills you and join him and he'd have you part of his army. And Abu Tabor looked at one of his men and he called him over to him. He says, jump over that cliff to your death. And the guy just never hesitated, just dove over the cliff. Emissaries. Then he called another guy and gave him a dagger and said, plunge this into your chest. He plunged it into his chest and fell dead right at the feet of that emissary. And he says, you go back and you tell your king that I've got 200 more men just like these two guys, and if he marches on me, I'll have him chained with my dogs by evening. The emissary went back and delivered the message. You might imagine how the king took that. The king marched on Abu Tabor. As legends has it, he was chained with Abu Tabor's dogs by evening. See, it's quality, not quantity, that counts. It's the size of the fight in the dog, not the size of the dog in the fight. And if we're going to fight for Jesus Christ, it's a whole different kind of fighting. And he's going to need men who don't ask questions. Are there bugs? Is the water going to be clean? What will my salary be? Will I have insurance? I mean, if you're asking those questions, you're the wrong guy. I mean, that sounds like good business. It sounds like, well, I got to take care of my family. Well, This guy comes to Jesus and he goes, hey, I want to follow you anywhere, but at first I got to go say bye to my family. Well, see you later. Oh, I got to go bury my dad. Let the dead bury their dead. We're preaching the gospel here. We're getting people saved for eternity. Let the dead bury the dead. You come and follow me and proclaim the gospel. And so there's all kinds of guys that's got to do something. They all got excuses for why they can't follow Christ right now. And Jesus says, you're going to have to just let go of that, and you're going to have to learn what it means to live by faith and trusting me. And you're going to have to make me your security blanket because you're going to be insecure in anything else you put your security in. And you're going to have to empty yourself so I can fill you up. It ain't ever going to change, guys. Just so you can go find a Jesus of Orange County, and he'll accommodate every bit of that. But the Jesus of Nazareth, who died on the cross, and he's a crucified Christ, is not going to do that. He has picked out some men and said, follow me, because we're going to go fish for guys. They're out there. But they're like Ezekiel 37. He took me to a valley of dry bones, as far as the eye could see. An army that had been killed a long time ago. And the bones were bleaching in the sun. And he says, Son of man, say to those bones to rise up. But the first thing he said was, Son of man, can these bones live? Lord, I don't know. You know. I mean, they're pretty dead. And he says, I want you to say to those bones, rise up. I think today that's what God's saying about men. Men are just bleaching in the sun. They're under-challenged. They're nowhere near the men that God's called them to be and could be and should be. And they just keep being under-challenged. Somebody, somewhere, sometime, maybe today, maybe now. Maybe now would be a good time for bones to rise up. Maybe there would be a time for someone to speak to those bones and say, bones, rise up. And those bones start coming together. And he said, I heard a rattling sound. When I get around guys like you, sometimes I'm listening. Do I hear a rattling sound? Is there a rattling sound among these men? Are these bones starting to come together? Is God calling these bones? And he says, Son of man, breathe life into those bones. And he did. In the last verse in Ezekiel 37, he said, and a vast army was raised up and came together. When I think about ministering to men, that's what I think about. We saw that at Promise Keepers. 50,000 guys in a stadium, a vast army of men hungry. And if churches had been willing to accept that and go with it, and go with what God was doing, there's no telling what could be going on with men in this country. Our country probably wouldn't be in the same position we're in today. Look at the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of men that gathered over a 3, 4, 5-year period with Promise Keepers when they were in their heyday. And if churches had welcomed them in, if churches had gotten behind what God was doing, and it was a supernatural thing, but churches wouldn't get involved. Churches wouldn't minister their men. If it doesn't generate in that church, it doesn't get followed. If somebody who's not a real influential insider in the church isn't championing the cause, it has no chance. And they tried. They made the 7 promises of a promise keeper. They tried to get into churches and get churches to get their men involved, and a few did, but some of them weren't really leaders of men. They were good men, but not leaders of men. They didn't get the churches back. And if the church doesn't have the backing of the clergy, if it doesn't have really key laymen that are championing its cause, this can't happen. It just won't ever happen in a church. And we pretty much backed off of trying to work with churches. We're too big a threat to them. They're too insecure. They're holding their men hostage. They're not going to minister to them because they don't know how to. But they're not going to let us minister to them either. Because we're a threat. We're a threat to their money. We're a threat to their presence. We're a threat to them. And so we believe if you're going to steal sheep, steal them boldly. And well-fed sheep can't be stolen. We got guys from 80 churches coming on a Friday morning. Men from well over 100 churches on our database. Because there's nowhere else for them to go. Where are they going to go? In a place where there's that environment for them to grow in Christ as a man of God. I wish there was 100 places. I wish there was 1,000. I wish there was ministries all over the place that are ministering to men and seeing the men revived and transformed, but unfortunately that's not the case. So I'm going to leave you with that. That's the word of the Lord. And my job coming this weekend was not to under-challenge you, and I hope you don't feel under-challenged. Go out and give them heaven. Thanks, guys.